The first time it happened, I thought I had imagined it. I had just gotten home from work, tossed my keys on the counter, and started making coffee when Echo's blue light flickered on. Playing most recent recording, the robotic voice announced. I frowned, turning toward the speaker. I never used the recording feature. I didn't even know it could do that. But then the sound crackled through the room. A man's voice. Low. Familiar. Not mine. I miss you. My breath caught. Then, Claire's voice, soft, almost shy, but laced with something I hadn't heard in a long time. Excitement. I miss you too. The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the tile floor. The sound barely registered over the roaring in my ears, the rush of blood pounding in my skull. My hands trembled as I reached for the Echo, my fingers hovering over the buttons like I needed to physically touch it to believe it was real. Echo, replay last recording, I said, my voice barely steady. A pause. Then, that voice again. Not mine. I miss you. Claire. I miss you too. My stomach twisted. A mistake. It had to be. Maybe it picked up audio from the TV, from a podcast, from some random source. That had to be it. But I knew. I knew. The way she had sounded. That wasn't scripted. That wasn't fiction. That was real. I moved fast, pulling out my phone, searching through settings, trying to figure out why the hell Echo had recorded in the first place. I navigated to the app, my fingers moving too quickly, too frantically, until I found the History tab. My stomach clenched. There were dozens of recordings. I stared at the list, each one marked with a timestamp, each one dated when I wasn't home. My pulse pounded in my ears as I hesitated, then clicked on the next most recent one. Static. A shuffle. Then, him. Did you tell him yet? Silence. My breath caught in my throat. Then Claire, her voice quieter this time. No. Claire. A sigh. I will. Just not yet. My vision blurred at the edges. My fingers were cold, my skin numb. I played another. More whispers. A chuckle. A sharp inhale. We can't do this here, Claire murmured. Then come over, the man said. A beat. Then, you know I can't. The sound of movement. Then her voice, lower, almost teasing. Then stop tempting me. My hands clenched into fists. I didn't recognize the man's voice. Not yet, but I would. I sank down into one of the kitchen chairs, staring at the Echo like it had just ripped my world apart in a single moment. Because it had. Claire was cheating. There was no denying it, no room for excuses, no possibility of a misunderstanding. I sat there, listening to the recordings one by one, time blurring, the days slipping through my fingers as I relived her betrayal over and over again. The way she spoke to him, the way she laughed, the way she whispered things she had never whispered to me. And the worst part? She sounded happy. I should have stopped. I should have turned it off, deleted the app, thrown the Echo into the garbage, and walked away before the rage built into something I couldn't control. But I didn't. Because as I scrolled further back, past the recent recordings, past the ones from last week, last month, I found something else. Something older. A file labeled System Archive, Do Not Delete. It was from 2 years ago. I hesitated. Then, I clicked play. A pause. A rustling sound. Then my voice. Claire, where were you tonight? My blood ran cold. A long silence. Then Claire, her tone defensive. I told you, I was at dinner with the girls. A sharp breath. My breath. You're lying. Silence. Then, the sound of her laughing. I stopped breathing. I didn't remember this conversation. Not at all. But it was me. It was her. An Echo had recorded it. But why? I checked the date. That was the night I first suspected her. The first night I had questioned where she was. The night she had come home late, smelling different, smiling too much, acting too normal. I had asked her once, and she had denied it, and eventually, I had let it go. But Echo never let it go. I scrolled further, clicking on another file. More audio. More conversations I didn't remember having. More arguments I had forgotten. Why won't you just drop this, Ethan? Because I know you're hiding something. You're paranoid. Silence. Then a soft whisper. You're just not enough anymore. My stomach twisted. I clicked another, and another, and another. All of them were memories I didn't remember, conversations I didn't know had been recorded. It was like the echo had been listening, watching, waiting, collecting every lie, every secret, every quiet moment of betrayal. I stared at the device, heart hammering, hands shaking. It had heard everything. And now so had I. I couldn't stop listening. I knew I should. Knew that every file I played was another knife driven deeper into my chest. But I couldn't help it. The echo had been recording for years, capturing things I had never noticed, conversations I had forgotten, secrets I never knew existed. This wasn't just an affair. This was a timeline of deception. I scrolled further, my thumb moving too fast, my breath shallow, my fingers trembling as I clicked on another file. It was from 6 months ago. Static crackled, then voices. Claire's voice. Low, cautious. He doesn't suspect anything. A pause. Then, the man. The same voice from the recent recordings. You sure? A laugh. Ethan never notices anything. My stomach clenched. I forced myself to keep listening, every word feeling like a punch to the gut. It's not like I don't love him, Claire whispered, and I froze. It's just different with you. You make me feel alive. A sharp inhale from the man. You don't think he's, I don't know, catching on? Claire scoffed. He's clueless. Besides, even if he did, he wouldn't do anything about it. Ethan's not that kind of man. My fingers clenched into a fist. Not that kind of man. I shut my eyes, inhaling through my nose, swallowing down the anger clawing its way up my throat. She thought I was weak. Thought I was too blind, too trusting, too pathetic to see her for what she really was. She had been sitting across from me at the dinner table, smiling, kissing me before bed, telling me she loved me, all while mocking me behind my back. An echo had heard all of it, recorded all of it, preserved every single lie. I kept going. More files, more conversations, more pieces of my life slipping through my fingers like sand. 2 years ago, an argument. My voice louder this time. Frustrated. You've been acting different. Claire's voice, sharp, dismissive. You're imagining things. No, I'm not. You're hiding something. Silence. Then, a sigh. You don't want to know, Ethan. Something inside me snapped. I shoved my chair back, pacing the kitchen, my breath sharp, my hands shaking. She had been doing this for years. Years of looking me in the eyes and lying. Years of pretending. Years of making me feel like I was paranoid for trusting my gut. And then, I saw it. A file labeled, Deleted Recordings. My pulse thundered in my ears. I clicked on it. A prompt popped up. Recover deleted files? Yes. It loaded for a second, then the screen refreshed. More recordings. One she had tried to erase. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding, my chest tight. I clicked the oldest one. Static. Then whispering. Claire. But she wasn't talking to him. She was talking to someone else. A woman's voice. Unfamiliar. Cold. Does he know? Claire exhaled. Shaky. No. But I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Then end it. Silence. Then, Claire again, voice strained. It's not that simple. A beat. Then, the woman's voice, low, firm. It has to be. I yanked off my headphones, my breath coming too fast, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This wasn't just about betrayal. Claire was hiding something else. Something worse. I stared at the echo, my mind spinning, the weight of everything pressing down on me like a vice. What the hell had I just uncovered? I should have stopped. I should have closed the app, shut off the echo, pretended like none of this existed. But I couldn't. Not after hearing that. Claire wasn't just hiding an affair. She was hiding something else. Something bigger. Something she had tried to erase. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through the recovered files, my breath shallow, my mind racing. I clicked on another one, heart hammering, forcing myself to listen. Static. Then, Claire's voice, hushed, nervous. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. The same woman from before responded, voice calm, calculating. You don't have a choice. You knew that when you started this. Silence. Then, Claire again, voice lower, almost a whisper. If he finds out, the woman cut her off. He won't. Not unless you get sloppy. A sharp inhale. You don't understand. He's been asking questions. If he digs too deep, then you handle it, the woman snapped, the first trace of irritation in her voice. You signed up for this, Claire. You finish it. My skin went cold. My grip tightened around my phone. What the hell was she involved in? I clicked another recording. This one was more recent. Just a few months ago. Claire's voice again, strained, on edge. I thought this was over. The woman let out a quiet chuckle, humorless. It's never over. You knew that. A pause. Unless you want me to tell him myself? My stomach twisted. Claire inhaled sharply. No, please. Silence stretched between them, thick, heavy. Then, the woman sighed. Then do what you're supposed to do. A sharp click. The call ended. I sat there, frozen, my breath shallow, my thoughts tangled in knots. Claire wasn't just lying to me. She was scared. But of what? Of who? I had spent the last few days drowning in the fact that she was cheating. But now? Now, I wasn't even sure if the affair was the worst of it. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly, my mind spinning. There was only one way to find out the truth. I had to confront her. That night, I waited. Claire came home late, later than usual, her hair damp like she had just taken a shower, her clothes a little too put together for someone who had stayed late at work. I watched her as she walked in, saw the hesitation in her movements, the way her eyes flickered to me, reading my expression, trying to gauge whether or not I suspected anything. She didn't know I had proof. She didn't know I had heard every single word. Hey, she said, forcing a smile. Long day? I stared at her for a second too long. She shifted slightly, uncomfortable. Yeah, I said finally, my voice even, unreadable. You? She nodded quickly, moving past me toward the kitchen. Exhausting, she muttered, opening the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water. You okay? I let the silence stretch, let her feel it, let it settle under her skin. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, scrolled, and pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen. You don't understand. He's been asking questions. Claire froze. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might pass out. The water bottle slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud, rolling away. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Where did you get that? She whispered. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. Why don't you tell me? She shook her head, backing up slightly, her hands trembling. Ethan, I took a step closer. Her back hit the counter. Who were you talking to, Claire? Silence. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. You tried to erase it, I said, my voice quieter now, deadlier. You tried to delete everything. But Echo saved it. I heard everything. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. She had spent months, years, lying to me, hiding things, treating me like I was blind, like I was stupid. Who is she? I demanded. What are you involved in? Claire swallowed hard, her entire body shaking. Then, in the smallest voice, she said, I can't tell you. I laughed, sharp, humorless. You don't have a choice. She looked at me, something breaking in her gaze, something raw, something that almost looked like fear. Not of me, of whatever it was she had been caught up in. If I tell you, she whispered, we're both dead. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Claire stood there, backed against the counter, her chest rising and falling too fast, her hands trembling, her lips parted like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Her words echoed in my head. If I tell you, we're both dead. My pulse pounded. My fingers curled into fists. I wanted to shake her, to make her talk, to force the truth out of her the way I had been forced to listen to every disgusting lie she had told me over the years. But I swallowed the rage, forcing my voice to stay steady. Tell me anyway. She shook her head immediately, squeezing her eyes shut, her breath hitching. I can't. Claire, I said, my tone sharper now, cutting through the air like a blade. You don't get to do this. You don't get to cheat. You don't get to lie to my face for years, and then act like you're the victim. You tell me what's going on, or I swear to God. You don't understand, she choked out, her voice so thin it was almost a whimper. It's not just me, Ethan. It's not just an affair. It's so much worse. I exhaled slowly, my patience snapping, my hands slamming against the counter beside her, caging her in. She flinched, her eyes snapping open, wide, terrified, but not of me, of whatever she had gotten herself into. Then explain it, I growled. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back for 2 years while treating me like an idiot. What's worse than that? Claire swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the doorway, like she expected someone to burst in at any second. It's not a guy, she whispered. I froze. What? She licked her lips, her voice barely above a breath. I mean it is, but it's not like you think. He's not just some random guy. He's not. She trailed off, her face twisting, like she was struggling to say the words. Then what is he, Claire? I demanded, my voice low, furious. Who is he? Her breathing came quicker now, panic setting in, her hands gripping the counter so tight her knuckles went white. He's the one who owns me, she whispered. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, my mind scrambling, my pulse hammering, my skin ice cold. Owns you? I repeated slowly, like I had misheard. Like the words didn't mean what I thought they meant. Claire shut her eyes again, her jaw tightening. Ethan, I got involved in something a long time ago. Before you and I were even married. I thought it was over. I thought I could walk away. But they don't let you walk away. My blood ran cold. They? She hesitated. Then, finally, she whispered, the people I worked for. I sucked in a breath, my grip tightening on the counter. Claire, what the hell did you do? She exhaled shakily, shaking her head, her gaze flickering to the echo, like she knew it had been listening all along, like she was realizing right now that all of her carefully erased secrets had never truly been erased. I used to work for them. At first, it was just money, simple jobs, nothing serious. Then, I got in too deep. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. I tried to leave, but he wouldn't let me. He told me if I ever tried to run, he'd come for me. That he'd come for anyone I ever loved. Her voice cracked on the last word. That's why I couldn't tell you. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. You're telling me this now? My voice came out rough, disbelieving. After all these years? You let me believe you were just cheating when in reality, you've been living in some nightmare? Tears slipped down her cheeks. I didn't want you to know. I wanted to protect you. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Protect me? By lying to me? By making me feel like a fool? She exhaled, her hands trembling harder. I didn't know Echo had those files, Ethan. I thought I deleted everything. I thought. Her voice faded, realization dawning in her expression, horror creeping in. Oh my God. Her hand shot to her mouth, eyes wide, staring at me like she had just figured out something far worse than anything I had imagined. Ethan, she whispered. If Echo still has those recordings, so do they. A chill ran through me. We both turned toward the Echo at the same time. The little blue light still glowing softly, still listening, still watching. A deep, suffocating dread settled into my chest. We weren't alone. Someone else had been listening all along. And now, they knew that I knew. The moment Claire said it, I felt it. A shift in the air. A weight settling in my chest. The suffocating realization that this wasn't just about us anymore. It never had been. Echo had been listening. And someone else had too. Claire's breath was shallow, uneven, her body rigid as she stared at the little glowing light on the device, like it had turned into something alive, something sinister. I moved first, stepping toward it, my fingers twitching as I reached for the power cord, yanking it from the socket so hard the speaker jerked across the counter before going dark. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. But it wasn't enough. Cutting the power wasn't enough. Whatever had been recorded, whatever was still out there, was already in someone else's hands. Claire exhaled shakily, rubbing her arms like she was trying to warm herself up, but I could see it in her eyes. The fear. The real kind. The kind that went beyond guilt and regret. This wasn't just about what I had found. It was about who else knew I had found it. I turned to her, my voice tight. You need to start talking. Right now. She licked her lips, hesitating. But there was no time for hesitation anymore. Who is he? The man you were talking to on those recordings. The one you said owns you. She swallowed hard. His name is Marcus Kane. The name meant nothing to me, but the way she said it, like it hurt to even let it out, sent a chill down my spine. Who is he? I pressed. Claire's gaze flickered to the door, then back to me. You don't want to know. My patience snapped. Too late. She let out a shaking breath, her hands gripping the counter. He's the one who got me involved in all of this. Before I met you. Before I left. I thought I was out. I thought. She trailed off, pressing her lips together, shaking her head. But no one leaves him, Ethan. No one. He finds people. He makes them do things they don't want to do. And if they refuse, she exhaled sharply, her hands shaking harder. They disappear. My stomach turned. Disappear? Claire nodded once, slow. If Echo still has those recordings, it means it didn't just save them here. It means they could be anywhere. And if Marcus hears them, if he thinks I've been talking, she cut herself off, her breath catching, her eyes darting toward the window like she expected someone to already be outside, watching. I ran a hand through my hair, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about cheating. This wasn't just about her. This was something else entirely. Something bigger. And I was standing in the middle of it. A sharp knock on the door sent both of us jolting. Claire stiffened instantly, her eyes wide, her whole body going rigid. My pulse hammered. We stared at each other. Neither of us moving, neither of us breathing. Then, another knock. Louder this time. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice steady. Expecting someone? Claire shook her head so fast it was almost violent. I turned toward the door, exhaling slowly, my hands clenching into fists at my sides before I forced them to relax. The air felt wrong. I moved toward the door, glancing at the peephole before I could stop myself. A man stood on the other side. Tall, dark suit, hands in his pockets, sunglasses despite the late hour. He wasn't a neighbor, wasn't a friend, wasn't a delivery guy. He was standing too still, like he had all the time in the world, like he was waiting for something. I stepped back, my pulse slamming against my ribs, every instinct screaming at me. Claire was still frozen in place, her breath coming too fast. We have to go, she whispered. Now. The knock came again, harder this time. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the back of the house, my mind racing. Who is he? I demanded in a harsh whisper. Claire barely got the words out. Marcus doesn't come himself, she choked. He sends them. Them. A sharp click echoed from the front door. Not a knock. The sound of a lock being picked. I didn't think. I moved. I grabbed Claire's hand and pulled her down the hallway, past the kitchen, toward the back door. She was already shaking, already trying to control her breathing, already realizing how bad this was. I yanked open the door, stepping into the cold night air just as I heard the front door swing open behind us. A voice. Deep. Smooth. Unhurried. Mrs. Lawson. We need to talk. Claire tensed. I pulled her harder. We ran. We ran. Claire's breath was ragged, her hand tight in mine as we sprinted across the backyard, our feet slamming against the damp grass. Behind us, I heard the front door creak open, slow, deliberate, like whoever was inside wasn't in a hurry because they didn't need to be. They knew we had nowhere to go. I yanked Claire toward the side gate, my mind racing, my pulse hammering. The streets were empty, dimly lit by flickering streetlights, and every shadow felt like it was moving, like it was alive. Where's your car? I hissed. 2 blocks over, she gasped. I parked down the street. Why the hell would you do that? Because I knew this would happen, she snapped. I knew they'd come eventually. I didn't have time to argue. I pulled her harder, keeping low, moving fast, scanning the street as we slipped between two houses. I couldn't hear footsteps behind us, but that didn't mean we weren't being watched. That didn't mean they weren't waiting for us to make a mistake. Claire was trembling, her breath coming too fast, and I knew she was barely holding it together. "Ethan," she whispered, "if we don't leave now, we won't get another chance." I nodded, gripping her wrist tighter as we moved toward the car. It was an old sedan, something cheap, forgettable, parked beneath a flickering street lamp. She fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so badly she almost dropped them. "Claire," I muttered, urgency curling in my voice. I know, she choked out, finally shoving the key into the lock. The second she swung the door open, I heard it. A low hum, a vibration, a phone ringing. Inside the car, Claire froze. My stomach twisted. I reached out, grabbed her hand, and yanked her away just as the entire car exploded. The force of it sent us both flying backward, heat searing against my skin, my ears ringing so loudly I couldn't hear anything but white noise. I hit the pavement hard, my vision blurring, my chest tightening as I gasped for air. Smoke curled into the sky, the scent of burning rubber, metal, and gasoline choking the air around us. My head spun. Claire was beside me, her body curled in on itself, coughing, shaking, her hair dusted with ash. I tried to move, but my muscles weren't listening, my brain still trying to catch up with what had just happened. They had rigged the car. They had known we'd run. They had been waiting. A shadow moved through the smoke. I forced my body up, ignoring the way my ribs screamed in protest. Claire groaned beside me, but I couldn't focus on her. Not now. Not when I saw him. The man from the door. The one in the suit. He walked slowly, deliberately, adjusting his cuffs like he had all the time in the world, like none of this was rushed, like he knew exactly how this night would end. My pulse thundered. I pulled Claire to her feet, gripping her arm tight as she stumbled. "Ethan," she gasped, her voice raw. "We need to, I know." But we had nowhere to go. The man stopped a few feet away. "Mrs. Lawson," he said smoothly, his voice like oil. "Mr. Lawson." That was quite an escape attempt. Claire shuddered beside me. "Let us go," I said, my voice hard, even. He tilted his head slightly, amused. "You misunderstand, Mr. Lawson. We're not here for you. We're here for her." His gaze flickered to Claire. "You know how this works." She stiffened, her whole body going rigid. My fingers curled into fists. "Over my dead body." He sighed. "If that's what you prefer." Two more figures stepped from the shadows, both dressed in dark suits, their movements fluid, practiced, trained. My stomach turned. This wasn't just some thug looking for a payday. This was something else entirely. Claire gripped my arm so tight, I felt her nails dig into my skin. "Ethan," she whispered. "Run." I didn't move. "Now!" she screamed, shoving me backward. The first man lunged. I reacted without thinking, swinging hard, my fist connecting with his jaw. He barely flinched. Instead, he caught my arm, twisting it so fast pain shot up my shoulder, my balance snapping, my body tilting. Then, a sharp hit to my ribs. I crumpled, gasping, my knees hitting the pavement. Claire screamed my name, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, pain exploding across my side. A gun clicked. Claire froze. I forced my head up. The man had drawn a pistol, the barrel gleaming under the streetlight. I stared at it, my chest heaving, my pulse a hammer against my skull. "You were never supposed to find out," he murmured, his voice almost regretful. "But now that you have," he exhaled, shaking his head. "Well, Marcus sends his regards." He lifted the gun. Claire moved before I could stop her. She lunged forward, shoving me hard, twisting her body between me and the bullet. The gun fired. The sound ripped through the night. Claire gasped, and then she fell. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her blood was already soaking through my hands. Claire's body went limp in my arms, her breath coming in short, weak gasps as blood pooled beneath her, staining my hands, my jeans, the pavement. My mind screamed at me to do something, but I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The gunman took a slow step forward, unfazed, adjusting the grip on his pistol like this was just another routine cleanup, like he hadn't just put a bullet in my wife. It didn't have to be this way, he muttered, tilting his head slightly as he looked at me, as if he was genuinely disappointed. Marcus wanted this handled quietly. You made it messy. My pulse slammed against my skull, my hands pressing against Claire's wound, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to keep her here, but she was slipping. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parting slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan. I shook my head. Don't talk. Stay with me. Her fingers twitched against my wrist, weak, barely there. I'm sorry, she breathed. A lump rose in my throat, but I shoved it down, forcing my focus back on the men in front of me. Call an ambulance, I demanded, my voice rough, breaking. The man in the suit sighed like I had just asked for something inconvenient. That's not how this ends. Something in me snapped. I let go of Claire just long enough to lunge, my fist swinging hard, catching the man off guard. He stumbled back, his grip on the gun loosening for a split second, long enough. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it, forcing the gun downward just as it fired again, the bullet slamming into the pavement inches from Claire's leg. I didn't stop. My other hand shot up, smashing into his nose with a sickening crunch, blood splattering across his suit. He let out a sharp grunt, staggering, but I didn't give him time to recover. I ripped the gun from his grip, turned, and fired. The first shot took out one of the men behind him. The second hit the other in the chest. They both went down. The man in the suit stumbled back, clutching his nose, rage flashing in his eyes, but I wasn't done. I crossed the distance between us in seconds, slamming the gun across his face, sending him sprawling onto the pavement. His sunglasses skidded across the ground, revealing dark, cold eyes. I pressed the barrel against his forehead, my hands steady despite the way my heart was threatening to explode. Call them off, I said, my voice low, shaking with barely restrained rage. He exhaled slowly, his lips twitching into something almost resembling a smirk. You think this ends with me? I pressed the gun harder against his skull. I think you're bleeding all over your expensive suit, and I don't think Marcus is gonna be too happy when he finds out you botched this. His jaw clenched. A long silence stretched between us. Then, finally, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek black phone, pressing a button. He didn't say anything, just let the call go through before dropping it onto the ground beside him. It's done, he muttered, glaring up at me. For now. I didn't trust him, but I had bigger problems. I turned back to Claire, dropping to my knees beside her, the gun still clenched in my hand. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale, sweat beading along her forehead. Hey, I murmured, brushing her hair back. Stay with me, okay? An ambulance is coming. Her lips parted, a weak, barely there smile forming. You hate hospitals. I let out a shaky breath. Yeah, well, guess I'll have to deal with it. Her fingers curled around my wrist, her grip so weak it sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Ethan, she breathed. You need to run. I shook my head. Not without you. She swallowed, her throat working hard, her voice barely a whisper. They won't stop, even if you kill him, even if we escape. A cough racked through her body convulsing, fresh blood staining her lips. Marcus doesn't let people go. I knew that, but I wasn't leaving her. I heard sirens in the distance, the wailing growing louder, closer, but I knew that didn't mean we were safe. Not even close. The man in the suit was still watching me, his expression unreadable, something cold flickering in his gaze. You should have stayed out of this, he murmured. She tried to protect you. You wouldn't let her. My grip on the gun tightened. Shut up. The sirens were almost on us now. I had minutes, maybe seconds. Claire's eyes fluttered. I had to get her out of here. I stood, hoisting her up as carefully as I could, ignoring the way she groaned in pain, the way my own ribs screamed in protest. I turned toward the street, toward the approaching ambulance, but before I could take another step, the man's voice stopped me cold. This isn't over, Lawson. I didn't turn back. Because I already knew he was right. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the sirens wailing as they sped off with Claire inside, leaving me standing in the middle of the blood-stained pavement, my mind racing, my heart hammering. I should have gone with her, should have held her hand, should have made sure she didn't close her eyes for the last time. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not when the man in the suit was still standing there, watching me, wiping the blood from his split lip with the back of his hand like this was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "This won't change anything," he muttered, adjusting his tie, unfazed by the fact that 2 of his men were dead on the ground, their bodies still cooling beneath the glow of the streetlights. "You think Marcus is just going to let this go?" I clenched my fists, the weight of the gun still warm in my palm, the metallic scent of blood thick in the air. "I don't care what Marcus thinks." The man sighed, shaking his head like I was some naive fool who didn't understand what I had just done. "You will." He glanced toward the distant ambulance lights, still flashing as they disappeared down the road. "She was his loose end. You were collateral damage. But now?" His lips curled into something almost like pity. "Now, you're a problem." I took a step forward, my pulse a steady drumbeat against my skull. "Then tell Marcus I'm not scared of him." A smirk. A quiet chuckle. "You will be." He didn't wait for me to respond. He just turned, disappearing into the darkness like a ghost, leaving behind nothing but the bodies of his men and the quiet hum of a city that didn't care about the war that had just started. I stood there for a long time, the gun still in my hand, my breath sharp and shallow, my mind cycling through every mistake, every lie, every moment that had led to this exact second. Claire had warned me. They wouldn't stop, even if we ran, even if we hid. Marcus Kane didn't let people leave. And now, I had just painted a target on my own back. But I wasn't running. Not anymore. I turned, forcing my feet to move, my ribs aching, my hands shaking, my vision still spinning from the explosion, from the fight, from the weight of everything pressing down on me. I needed a plan. I needed to find out who the hell Marcus Kane really was. And I knew exactly where to start. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee, the fluorescent lights too bright, the walls too white, everything too clean for a night that had been anything but. I pushed through the doors, ignoring the concerned looks from the nurses, the security guard who eyed the bruises on my face, the dried blood on my shirt. Claire was in surgery. Critical condition. The words felt foreign, unreal, like they belonged to someone else's life, someone else's nightmare. But this was mine. I sank into one of the plastic chairs, my elbows resting on my knees, my head in my hands, my breath coming too fast, too shallow. I had spent the last few years living in a lie, blind to the truth, thinking my biggest problem was whether or not my wife loved me. But now, I wasn't even sure if she would survive the night. A voice pulled me from my thoughts. "Mr. Lawson?" I looked up. A doctor, mid-40s, tired eyes, the kind of expression that had seen too much, that had delivered too much bad news. I stood too fast, my vision tilting, my hands clenching at my sides. "Is she?" "She's stable," he interrupted, his voice calm, measured. "But she lost a lot of blood. We had to." I didn't hear the rest. The relief hit so hard I had to sit back down. My chest ached, my ribs still screaming from the fight, but none of it mattered. She was alive. But for how long? Because I knew the truth now. They would come again. They would come for her. For me. For anyone who stood in their way. And there was only one way to stop it. I pushed to my feet, my body slow, heavy, like I was dragging the weight of the entire night with me. I turned toward the exit, my heart steady now, my mind clear, every ounce of doubt burned away. I wasn't running. I was ending this. The warehouse smelled like rust and old gasoline, the kind of place where people disappeared, where problems got buried beneath concrete and steel, the kind of place Marcus Kane operated from. I had spent the last 2 hours tracking him down, using every resource I had, every favor I was owed, every connection Claire had tried to keep hidden from me. And now I was here, standing at the edge of his world. The guards at the entrance didn't even hesitate when they saw me. Guns were drawn. Orders were shouted. But I didn't care. I stepped forward, lifting my hands, my breath steady, My pulse slow. Take me to him. They exchanged a glance. Then, one of them reached for his radio. And just like that, the doors opened. I walked inside, past stacks of crates, the hum of machinery, the distant sound of laughter, of power. Marcus Kane wasn't just some businessman. He was a ghost. A name whispered in the shadows. A force that controlled things no one even realized were being controlled. And now? Now, I was standing right in front of him. He was older than I expected. Late 50s, maybe. Sharp suit. Cold, calculating eyes that flickered with amusement as he looked me over, as if I was nothing more than an interesting inconvenience. "Mr. Lawson," he said smoothly, swirling a glass of whiskey in one hand. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. Most people don't walk through my doors voluntarily." I didn't blink. "You sent your men to kill my wife." He smiled. "That depends. Is she dead?" A pause. Then, a slow, amused chuckle. "No? Then I'd say my men failed." I took a step forward, my voice low. "They won't get another chance." Marcus studied me, taking a slow sip of his drink, completely unfazed. "Tell me, Ethan, what exactly do you think you're going to do here?" I reached into my jacket and placed Claire's voice recorder on the table between us. The same one Echo had recorded. The same one that held every single secret Claire had been too scared to tell me. Marcus's expression didn't change, but I saw it. The flicker of something. Something dangerous. I smiled. "Let's talk." Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at the voice recorder sitting on the table between us, the weight of it heavy in the silent room. His fingers tightened slightly around the glass in his hand. Just a flicker of tension, barely noticeable, but I saw it. I had his attention now. That was the most dangerous thing I could have. The warehouse was eerily quiet, the hum of machinery in the background barely a murmur compared to the tension stretching between us. I could feel the eyes of his men on me, waiting, watching, hands on their weapons, ready. They didn't know what was on the recorder, but Marcus did. He knew exactly what Claire had been running from. He knew what I had heard. And now, he knew I had it all. His voice was calm when he finally spoke, measured, not a single crack in his smooth exterior. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Lawson." I didn't look away. Probably both. A slow smirk, a tilt of his head. "What do you want?" I leaned forward slightly, resting my arms on the table, keeping my voice low, steady. "I want Claire safe. I want you to leave us alone. And I want every single person you've sent after us to disappear. Permanently." Marcus let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "You think you're in a position to make demands?" He gestured around us, to the dozen armed men standing in the shadows, all waiting for his command. "You walked into my world, Ethan. Do you really think you're leaving?" I smirked. "That depends." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, tapped the screen once, and placed it on the table next to the recorder. The call timer was already running. A live connection. Marcus's jaw twitched. He understood. Someone else was listening. He exhaled slowly, swirling the whiskey in his glass before setting it down. "Smart," he admitted. "But tell me, what exactly do you think happens if I say no?" I tilted my head slightly. "Then this recording gets leaked to every law enforcement agency, every journalist, every federal contact I can find. And I promise you, there's at least one person in the world who hates you enough to run with it." A long pause. He studied me, expression unreadable, eyes sharp, calculating, weighing the risks. "And what stops me from killing you right now and dealing with the fallout later?" I smiled. "Because if I die, the recording gets sent out automatically. Claire made sure of that before I got here." A lie. A bluff. But a good one. Marcus's fingers tapped against the table once, then twice. Then, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose, his expression unreadable. "You're an interesting man, Ethan." A slow nod, almost like he was respecting the move I had just made. Then, he tilted his head toward one of his men. "Call them off." The man hesitated for half a second before nodding, stepping away, murmuring something into a radio. I didn't let myself breathe yet. "And Claire?" I pushed. Marcus's lips curled into something that almost looked like amusement. She was never my problem, he said simply. She ran, but she was never a threat to me. He glanced at the recorder again, then back at me. But you? You became one the moment you walked in here. I didn't flinch. And now? Marcus considered me for a long moment, then exhaled sharply. Now, I never want to see you again. That was it. I had one. I didn't let myself celebrate. Not yet. I just reached forward, grabbed the recorder, grabbed my phone, and stood. Marcus didn't stop me. None of his men moved. I turned, my pulse hammering in my ears, forcing myself to walk slow, forcing myself to not look like I was running for my life. Because that's exactly what I was doing. I stepped out of the warehouse into the cold night air, the tension still wrapped around my ribs like a vice. My muscles locked so tight I thought they might snap. I walked to the end of the block before I let out a slow breath, my hands still shaking. I had done it. Claire was safe. We were free. 3 weeks later, I sat in the hospital, my fingers laced with Claire's, her hands still weak in mine. She had made it through surgery. Barely. But she was here. Alive. And for the first time in a long time, there was no one watching us, no one hunting us, no whispers in the dark waiting to take everything away. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking up at me, and I saw it. The relief, the exhaustion, the understanding that we had made it. Hey, I murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You okay? Her lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, but almost. I will be. I nodded, squeezing her hand. And for the first time in a long time, I actually believed it.